Welcome to Inside the Lab with CMBC. My name is Dietrich Stout, and I'm the Associate Director of the Center for Mind, Brain, and Culture at Emory University. And today I'm talking with primatologist Marcela Benitez. Marcela is currently a postdoctoral fellow working with Sarah Brosnan at Georgia State University. But I'm very pleased to say she will be joining the Emory Department of Anthropology as an assistant professor in spring 2021. So her primary research interests have to do with the evolution of social cognition. Marcela, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for that introduction. That's basically more or less all you need to know. No, I'm a postdoctoral research fellow right now at Georgia State with Sarah, and very excited to be joining the Department of Anthropology in January. Before I came to Atlanta, I got my joint PhD in biological anthropology and biopsychology at the University of Michigan, working with Dr. Jacinta Biener and Dr. Tori Bergman, where I studied rival assessment strategies in male gelato monkeys in the highlands of Ethiopia. And prior to doing that, I got my bachelor degree at Yale University in ecology and evolutionary biology, and that's sort of where I started into this interest of social cognition and non-human primate work.
You get interested in that, monkeys and cognition?
Well, actually, I wanted to study marine biology. I've always been interested in animals, and that's what I went into my bachelor's degree in ecology and evolutionary biology. But I got involved working with Lori Santos at the Comparative Cognition Laboratory at Yale, where she used to have capuchin monkeys, first as an undergrad, and then later she took me on as a lab manager. And then I realized that it wasn't so much about wanting to study dolphins as I wanted to do, but it was an interest in social behavior. Specifically social intelligence and social cognition. And so working with capuchins, I kind of got the opportunity to develop some of those tools. And then after working with her, I decided I really wanted to get experience working with primates in the wild. And that's when I ventured out to Argentina, where I worked with Dr. Eduardo Fernandez Duque on owl monkey behavior in northern Argentina and Formosa. So I got the sort of field experience there, the lab experience with Lori in college, and kind of combined them because owl monkeys are not very social. So while I liked doing the field work, I wasn't particularly interested in some of the questions that we were asking there. Capuchins are very social and very smart, but we were doing predominantly captive work in these sort of dyadic paradigms. And so my interests sort of developed in trying to figure out how do I do these kind of studies that we do in captivity, but in the wild with highly gregarious, highly social monkeys.
Okay. What's it like working in the field with monkeys?
It's amazing. So I've had the opportunity to work in Argentina, northern Argentina, Formosa with owl monkeys and with capuchins in Iguazu. I spent almost 2 years in Ethiopia studying gelato monkeys. And now my research takes me to Costa Rica, where I have a field site looking at wild white-faced capuchin monkeys. It's a fascinating experience. You have to have a lot of patience and a lot of resilience for some of the things that happen in the field, lots of bugs and a lot of heat. But just being able to be out there and observe their natural behavior and get to sort of identify individuals and start seeing patterns of behavior and some of the incredible things that you see being out there. Like I saw a gelato female give birth, which was just mind-blowing. So it's a pretty unique opportunity if it's something that interests you to sort of get out there and actually observe animals in their sort of natural habitats.
You said, in terms of a topic, social cognition is really what you're interested in, and maybe you could say a little bit more about why you find that really intriguing. And I could have my own question: is social cognition really like a separate thing, or is it just cognition applied in a social setting? Is there something distinctive about it?
Yeah. Well, what I find interesting about it is I think that is, we're social primates, and so many of the decisions we make on a regular basis involve social components. So whether it's we're choosing to cooperate with someone, we're choosing to take a new job, we're choosing to interact with certain individuals and not other individuals. So many of the challenges that we face as humans have this sort of social component. And I think that's obviously true of other social animals, that so much of the issues and the problems that they face on a daily basis have this important social aspect to it. Do I see a social cognition as sort of its separate entity? Not necessarily. I think it definitely pulls on aspects of brain evolution that don't necessarily have to be social in nature. But when you're a social primate, even something like, for example, using tools is going to have that social aspect to it. Some aspects of it are going to be more on the social side, like something like theory of mind, where I think you have a pretty strong necessity to know what others are thinking and what their other viewpoints are, but they have an ecological component too. If you understand that individual has information about where food can be found, then you can use that type of cognition in terms of theory of mind to be able to find the food source. So no, I don't think that they're separate, but I do think that sociality has a pretty big impact on cognition and brain development.
Cool. And so you're continuing to pursue these questions. I know you've been working to set up a field site at Toboga, and so what are you kind of like working on right now?
Yeah, so these are definitely still the questions that drive my research. Specifically, I'm interested in how social animals make informed decisions, what factors influence those choices, and ultimately why those decisions can be adaptive, how they can affect their social relationships and reproductive success down the line. So our goal at Toboga, which is a field site we started in June of 2017, so it's relatively new, Cappuccinos de Toboga, is to integrate some of the experimental paradigms that we do in captivity, but in the wild with wild primates. And in so doing, allowing for all the normal social interactions that happens on a daily basis, allowing for all the normal ecological variation that's happening, and just sort of seeing how they make these decisions within their own natural social realm. And that's sort of some of the paradigms that I'm beginning to work with right now.
Yeah, so that's an interesting approach, is to take things that have been developed in the lab and try to adapt them for use in the field. Could you tell us about any particular types of experiments that you're adapting that way?
Yeah, so one of the things we're working on right now is understanding the effects of between group conflict on cooperative decision making within the group. In general, one of the paradigms to look at whether two individuals sort of cooperate and can cooperate is a bar pull paradigm. So two individuals have to come up and pull in an apparatus. They each have to pull one side together to pull in the apparatus to get access to a food resource. And so what we're doing is introducing this concept of between group competition. So in captivity, this looks like a tug of war between groups. And in the wild, we're able to bring the same exact paradigm out to the wild, where we have feeding platforms that we've habituated the monkeys on. But instead of the monkeys being in the cage, the platform and the apparatus in the cage. So for the monkeys to access the food, they have to pull in together the apparatus to get to a point where there's a hole in it and they can reach in and get the food item. So that's sort of one paradigm that we're using in the field right now. Another one is a feeder box that we have that we can remotely control with RFID readers that we have in the monkeys' wrists. And so we can change who gets access to the boxes and when they get access to the boxes to see whether they are more likely to move to certain boxes, how that affects group movement, what happens when one individual in the group has access to the high quality reward box and no other individuals in the group do. And sort of we can shift those sort of social dynamics around and see what we get in terms of decision-making of which boxes they go to. So these are two paradigms that we're working on right now. But I think that's the fun part. That's what I really like about my research, which is that so much of it is methodological. It's a matter of us figuring out how can we test these social cognitive processes in non-human primates. And I think that's one of the most interesting factors, something that Franz de Waal, who was at Emory, has said multiple times, that it's not a matter of how smart they are, but how smart we are to be able to test how smart they are. And that's a part that I really enjoy, which is sort of coming up with these methodological paradigms that are field friendly, that will allow us to get at actual decision-making strategies in the wild.
You've done some work with baboons as well as with capuchins. Maybe you could compare how are baboons and capuchins different to work with?
Sure. So I worked with gelada monkeys before working with capuchins. Geladas are pretty awesome. They're super social. They live in groups of up to 2,000 individuals. But they're not necessarily the smartest primates. It's the best way to put it. They have such a large group size, but they seem to only kind of keep tabs on a small number of individuals within their specific units. And they seem to be relying a lot more on shorthand cues and signals to make assessments of other individuals within the group. And capuchins are probably one of the smartest primates. They have the largest brain to body ratio of any primate species. So despite being New World monkeys and being sort of more evolutionarily distant from us than Cercopithecines, older monkeys would be, they're a really interesting species to study because they're so smart. They have social cultural traditions, they use tools, neither of which we see a lot in baboons or in Cercopithecines. But the interesting thing is almost all of the work that's been done on understanding social knowledge and social cognition in wild primates has taken place in Cercopithecine. So in baboons and in geladas, that's come from Robert Seyfarth and Dorothy Cheney's pioneering work with baboons. But none of that was really translated over to New World monkeys and apes in that terms of research paradigms in the wild. Whereas in captivity, there's been a huge focus on capuchins and New World monkeys, significantly less so on the highly gregarious baboons and well, geladas don't do well in captivity in general. And so you have sort of this interesting paradigms that have sort of been split in these two camps between the baboon people and the New World monkey people. And so I'm really grateful to have had the training in the Cercopithecine camp to now kind of bring that into some of the work that we're doing with New World monkeys, with capuchins.
Cool. And so primatologists always get this sort of weird question about how their studies are relevant to people. I mean, you don't ask other people, like, whether they study animals, why, but primatologists are always sort of asked, well, what does the study of monkeys have to tell us about humans? So I'll ask you that. How's the work you do relevant to understanding human cognition?
Sure. I think on a greater scale, my interest in studying non-human primates is to study humans and understand human behavior better, human social behavior better. In general, we know that we're so smart, right? That we have these really heightened social mind. And I think one of the questions that a lot of us in anthropology and in psychology are interested in is, why are humans so smart? What are the sort of selective forces that drove for this remarkable human intelligence? And I think the more we study non-human primates, we start realizing that it's not that we're necessarily entirely unique in being that intelligent. It's just that we're on an extreme side of a spectrum. And so understanding the variation in that spectrum, I think, is really important. So studying different non-human primate species, specifically in aspects of social cognition and decision-making, gives us a really good insight into the factors that may have selected for parts of the really awesome human brain. Right. So, for example, what I'm looking at right now is the effects of between group competition on cooperation. It's a phenomenon known as parochial altruism, and it seems to be really important in human groups that we're more cooperative with our in-group or competing against another group. And we know this is a big driving factor of this high levels of cooperation in humans. And so one of the questions I'm interested in is that something that's unique to humans, or is that widespread across the primate taxa? And is that important for high levels of cooperation, or is it a byproduct of high levels of intelligence? And so by looking at species, for example, chimpanzees and capuchin monkeys that are highly cooperative and highly intelligent, versus comparing them to, say, a squirrel monkey, which is highly social, has a pretty large brain, but not highly cooperative, we can look at whether something like parochial altruism is sort of widespread, whether it's unique to humans, or whether we see it in these highly cooperative species, but not this other highly social, highly intelligent species. And so it gives us a sort of a comparative measure to look at processes that just don't fossilize well.
And so what do you think the answer to that is going to be? Is it just linked with intelligence, or is it more specific than that?
I mean, I'm going to guess, I think there's two ways you can go. I think it's going to be pretty widespread across primates. I mean, the highest levels of cooperation that we see just from observation always happens when there's conflict. So we look at border patrols and chimpanzees, you look at defending, coming together to mob against predators. It seems like a pretty natural thing. You cooperate when there's this common enemy. I think the question is whether they change these rates of cooperation and who they cooperate with in these different contexts. Specifically, I'm interested in how these individuals that tend to not cooperate very well, like dominant individuals, they also tend to be the ones who are on the front lines of this cooperation when there's between group conflict. So that sort of shift and what causes that shift in those individuals and in those decisions. So I think there's a possibility that we just see it widespread, and we see it in all group living animals, and it's not really something all that special. But there's also a possibility that it's something that's really important for the high levels of cooperation that we do see, in which case I'd expect to see it in chimpanzees and capuchin monkeys and humans, but not in squirrel monkeys.
Right. Yeah. I mean, sometimes people propose that this sort of thing is present, but there might be a qualitative difference in sort of the sophistication of the strategies that are used and that sort of thing, depending on relative intelligence.
Right. And so that's why I think for us, what we're planning on doing, and this is a grant that we just received with Sarah Brosnan, is this sort of similar paradigm across species, which is why that sort of experimental paradigm becomes so important versus just the observational sort of data that we have that they do tend to cooperate. because that's where we can actually get at that qualitative difference. Like, are they actually cooperating more in this context than they cooperate normally? Or is it that we just see this cooperation in that context? And I think that becomes a really important question.
So, I mean, the one other thing that you always have to talk about when you're talking about primate research is, of course, also conservation, because very many primate species are threatened in the wild. And could you talk a little bit about the situation that the capuchins are in and how you interact with that?
Sure. So our field site in Costa Rica, we work a lot on increasing scientific awareness and on aspects of conservation. So we're involved with a number of groups there, working on different types of projects. So one of the projects we're working on, for example, is figuring out a way to connect core biological corridors across some of these reserves in Costa Rica, because they're sort of separated by humans. And so being able to connect biological corridors to allow for the movement of faunas is really important there. We help with census stuff, so we're looking a lot at what kind of animals we do see in the Toboga forest. So these are sort of the bigger questions. Capuchins in general aren't endangered. They're pretty widespread. One of the biggest issues we get with capuchins is that they're so gregarious and they're so curious that in areas where there's a lot of ecotourism, you find that they are sort of coming down to humans or interacting with humans or being fed by humans. And that sort of becomes one of the larger issues. So by the scientific awareness aspect of it and being able to work with students at the Universidad Técnica Nacional, which is our collaborators, who are going into ecotourism and giving them actual information about capuchins, letting them observe behavior, really helps with some of those issues that we see with capuchins interacting with tourists as they sort of go off into their institutions to work in ecotourism. So those are some of the things we're working on now.
Dr. Marcela Benitez, thank you so much for joining us on In the Lab with the CMBC, and I look forward to eventually seeing you in person in the department.
Yes, me too. Thank you for having me.